Welcome, Kathy, to this interview for the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the Women in the Profession History Project. Thank you for sharing your career summary. As I read through it, I had visions of some of my childhood games. I liked color forms, adding and subtracting colors and shapes, costumes for the different characters, dolls for whom you change the career costume. But when I thought about your career, it inspired me to look at chutes and ladders with a twist. You climbed up a ladder, gleefully slid down, and started to climb up the next ladder of your career. And I hope today we have fun exploring all those ladders and all those gleeful slides to the next event. Some of your history includes you're currently commissioner of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Before that, you were secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, 18 years as a Pennsylvania member of the House of Representatives, serving the 194th District, and an executive in 2 nonprofits along the way, vice president of Intercommunity Action, Inc., and campaign manager for the Campaign for Fair Education Funding. When you and I met, you were very active in the Pennsylvania Bar Association, chair of the Women in the Profession, the Woman at Large Governor, and chair of the House of Delegates for the PBA. What a lot of ladders to climb. Are you tired?
I still have a little bit more juice in me.
I think you do. I'm not surprised. As a college student or a college grad, did you see yourself aspiring to these various positions? For example, running for office.
Yeah, that's interesting. The short answer is no, but of course there's never just a short answer. I know everyone remembers their youth and those college advisors telling you about your 1-year plan and your 5-year plan and your 10-year plan. And, that is very important, but plans never quite work out the way you think they would. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit, and I suspect there are a lot of people like me, that I had vague notions of where I wanted to go, but I wasn't as aggressive as perhaps you imagine to have accomplished, and I'm very, very humble as well as proud of all the opportunities that I've had. But I like to describe it as it almost took, for me, moments of bravery to make those different jumps, to climb those different ladders, to take those different slides, to use your chutes and ladders metaphor. Sometimes it took someone else seeing something in me to give me that little boost to start up the ladder or to take a risk and go down the slide. So I wouldn't really describe myself as someone who was laser focused on some 5 or 10-year plan and some ultimate goal for my future. As well, I'd more describe it as someone who, in moments of opportunity, figured out how to muster up a little bit of bravery to take that next step and just plunge into the pool to the next level and see where it took me.
Now, you did go to law school, Temple?
Yes.
Okay, and how did you choose Temple? Was it right out of college?
No, a little backstory on that. When I was young, I always thought I wanted to be an attorney. As with most young people, you often get your ideas of careers and professions from your family, from your parents. And my dad was a lawyer. My uncle was a lawyer. I loved watching Perry Mason on TV. And I didn't want to be Della. I wanted to be Perry Mason. But I got halfway through college and I just realized that I needed to understand the real world. I knew I was working in this theoretical realm. So I kind of put law school, I don't even know in my mind if I put it on the shelf. I think I put it in the deep 6 for the short run. And I got out of college and I found my first job in Philadelphia. I was very happily working in employment training and labor management relations. But after about 5 years, I realized that the opportunities in what I was doing didn't go very far. Mm-hmm. I couldn't see a lot of progression. I couldn't figure out where that next 10-year or 5-year path was. So that was where both of my parents, who never really pushed me to be a lawyer, would start to say, well, what about law school? And so I thought, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't know if I want to be a lawyer. And my dad would say, well, there are a lot of lawyers doing things that aren't just practicing law, and that's a fabulous education to get. So that is the long way to say that I finally decided to take the jump. And I only could afford to go to night school because I was working full time and I needed to keep that employment. And so I ended up applying only to Temple University. And there's a whole other story with that, too.
All right, so you applied at Temple, and I understand there was a timing issue there as to when you applied and got your LSATs.
Yeah, so when I finally decided to do this, I kind of looked it up and I was like, oh my goodness, the applications are due in a couple of weeks. So I had to put the application in before I think I'd taken the LSATs,
right?
But I didn't have results yet, and I had to get the application in. And I've never been a very good objective test taker, so I was like, these scores are not going to be good. At best, they're going to be mediocre, and they were mediocre. But I thought, how can I overcome this? So I really concentrated on getting some good letters of support from my current employer, from somebody who was an Evening Temple Law School student who was an elected official, and I'd worked on his campaign, Joe Huffle at the time. But I remember calling my old college advisor, who I had a really good relationship with, and I said, Mike, I'm applying to law school. That's great, Kathy. I said, well, here's your job. I said, I need you to write me a letter of recommendation, and I need you to tell them that I was actually a good student and a pretty smart cookie, and even if those scores aren't going to reflect it, she's not as dumb as those scores make her seem. Oh. And he laughed, and he said, I'm happy to write you a good letter of recommendation. And it's a good thing, because I think I had these 3 really strong letters of recommendation that gave me that encouragement, that bravery to move forward. And if I had seen my scores first, I probably, like a lot of people, would have said, these aren't good enough to apply to school. But I took that jump, and it worked, and I went to law school at night. Well, and I continued working at the Labor Management Committee during that time.
I think that really demonstrates, Kathy, that we can't hold ourselves back because that artificial number on a paper is like, oh, you're not good enough. I really love the fact that you kind of found the strength within yourself, captured that bravery, and went forward. And then you wound up getting a job with a fabulous law firm. You're working with Abe Rich.
I ended up at Fox Rothschild in Philadelphia. And again, another one of those opportunities and bravery issues. I had sat out the fall recruiting process that most law students go to, because that was all the big firms. And I didn't think I wanted to go to big firm, but quite frankly, I also didn't think I was big firm material. A woman who was on my board of directors at the Philadelphia Area Labor Management Committee, where I was, who was the U.S. representative for the U.S. Department of Labor, connected me with a friend of hers who was a young associate at Fox Rothschild. And I talked to him about Fox Rothschild, and he encouraged me to send my resume to them. Well, lo and behold, Fox, for the past couple of years before that, had made all of their offers to first-year associates in the fall. Right. And then someone came along in the spring that they were interested in, but they didn't have a position for. So this year that I was applying, or that I was coming out of law school, they'd held one position back.
That's great.
So here in the spring, they have a first-year associate position at the law firm, and I went in and I interviewed with Abe Rich and Peter Vira and some other very fabulous attorneys, and they all convinced me that a big law firm was exactly what I wanted, and I took the opportunity and I went there.
Oh,
yeah,
that's great. Now, I think you told me that they had a policy about the New Jersey bar exam.
Oh gosh, yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So this was 1989, and multi-state practices had just opened up. And so they wanted all of the young associates to start getting licensed in dual states. And many Philadelphia firms were interested in Jersey, so we were all required to take both the Pennsylvania and the New Jersey bar exam. Well, I think I had mentioned earlier in my applications to law school that objective tests were not really my thing. I was much better at essays. So when I took the bar exams, I thought the New Jersey essays were actually the easiest of the 3 components I took. And I wasn't really worried about it. Well, the results come out, and here's like all of these other first-year colleagues of mine, first-year associates, who had all passed both bar exams, and I hadn't passed New Jersey, and I was mortified. And the partners were, oh, don't worry about it, just take it again. And so I signed up, and it was only offered once a year, and the next year I study, and I go to take it again, and I came back from the exam, and I said to my supervising partner, Jeff Albert, which remind me to tell you a little story there, too, about opportunities, and Abe, who was head of the litigation department, I was like, I'm not going to pass this time. It was a week after my father had passed away. I was not able to concentrate. I didn't even finish the exam. And they were like, that's okay, you're doing well. So now, year 3, third-year associate, you have a caseload, you're busy. I didn't study at all. And I signed up to take this exam, and I thought, who are you kidding, Kathy? Why are you going to take this exam when 2 times you studied and you failed it? And then I thought, well, if I don't go, I have a 0% chance of passing. So I cleared my calendar, I might as well go. 2 things happened. A, I passed the exam. And B, I never used the New Jersey license. And the reason I never used the New Jersey license gets into that next opportunity, because I ended up running into my current state legislator, Dick Hayden, taking the New Jersey bar exam. And we knew each other. When Dick first got to the legislature, my dad was still living, and he was the majority leader. So Dick knew, hey, my leader's daughter lives in my district, and we had met a couple of times, but never really had any substantive conversation. We have the longest conversation we ever had with each other, comparing answers of how we responded on to the New Jersey essays. And then, lo and behold, a couple months later, I get a phone call from him.
Okay, so Dick Hayden walks into your life through fortuitous circumstances, and then that led you to a different ladder?
Exactly. So my phone rings, and I answer, and Kathy, it's Dick Hayden. I was like, Dick, what do I have the pleasure of my state legislator calling me for? He said, well, remember when I saw you at the New Jersey bar exam? The reason I was taking that is I was preparing for my next step. It's not public yet, but I don't plan to run for re-election. I really would like to recruit a good candidate. I really would like to recruit a woman candidate, because there aren't enough women in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and I thought of you.
Wow, that is amazing.
And I, to this day, say, had I not gone to take that New Jersey bar exam for the 3rd darn time, would I have even been on his radar screen? So that's another one of those kind of, taking an opportunity, even if you were afraid to, going for that 3rd try at the bar exam, even though the first 2 times weren't successful.
Oh, that's great. And how wonderful that he was reaching out to a woman who he thought was qualified. That's quite an honor.
Right.
Okay.
So it didn't come easy. I had to really think about whether it was something I wanted to do. I did not say yes right away. I had a perception of what I thought it would be like to be a public elected official, kind of in the fishbowl, like I saw through a child's eye, my father all through his career. But through some encouragement and some coaching from Dick and some other folks, I realized that the one thing I didn't want to do is wake up 20 years from now, wake up today and say, I once had this opportunity and I didn't even try.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be in that. I didn't even try. So I just decided, another moment of bravery, take the plunge, and if it's meant to be, it will happen. And if it's not meant to be, something else will happen.
Okay. So what was it like campaigning in 1992?
Yeah.
What was the political atmosphere then?
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to mention, and I had thrown out Jeff Albert, who at the time was my supervising partner at Fox Rothschild. But I had encountered Jeff before. These are the circles of opportunity that come to us in our life that sometimes we don't recognize it. I had been a young person in Philadelphia trying to kind of make connections and just kind of get integrated in the community. And my dad told me, hey, we have this really sharp young legislator who's going to run for Congress. I'd only been in Philly for like 3 years. You should help him out on his campaign. Well, here it was Joe Huffle. It was the first year he was running for Congress in 1982 or 3. I'm forgetting the year. And Jeff Albert was his treasurer.
Okay.
So I ended up being the volunteer coordinator for the Joe Huffle for Congress campaign in Lower Merion Township, which was where I was living at that time, when there were only 15% Democrats in the township. So that's how I got to know Joe. That's how I got to know Jeff. Joe ends up being one of my references for law school when I decide to apply to law school. I get to Fox Rothschild the first day, and I'm assigned to the litigation work group of partner Jeff Albert.
Oh, wow.
Because Jeff sat at a partners meeting when they were trying to figure out where the 9 new associates were going to go, and he said, oh, Kathy Manderino, I know her work ethic from the campaign. You can put her in my group. Yes. And because of that, when I then had this opportunity to run for office while I was a young associate at a law firm, I had a partner supervisor who was encouraging of me, worked with me to make sure that I can get my work done and still have the flexibility to campaign, and was really very supportive. And I could have had a totally different experience. 92 was also the year of the woman, the first year of the woman.
Okay.
And so there were a lot of women running for elected office, and that was kind of exciting to see too. So there was a lot of energy and synergy around women running for elected office. There were a lot of us in Philadelphia trying to break into the Pennsylvania General Assembly. We all weren't successful, but I was one of the fortunate and successful ones.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So as you tell your story, your father, your mother have kind of slipped into the story. Tell me a little bit more about your family, how they supported you, how they raised you. They obviously must become very proud of you.
Yeah, well, thank you. As I mentioned, my dad was an attorney by education and practice throughout his whole career, but he also served in the Pennsylvania General Assembly with a distinguished career of 22 years up until his death. At the pinnacle of his career, he was Speaker of the Pennsylvania House. His brother Lou, many lawyers know because my Uncle Lou was Justice Louis Manderino, first on the Commonwealth, Dean of Duquesne Law School, then on the Commonwealth Court, and then on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But my mom, God bless her, she was one of 12 children from a steel worker family. Wow. Much of my hometown was all worked in the steel mill. And she did not have an opportunity to go to college. So she was also very encouraging of me. And she passed away when I was only partway through law school. And I never quite realized until after she passed away how proud she was that I was going to be a lawyer. I remember very much at her funeral and even after that, all of her girlfriends from her card clubs and her social circles saying to me, oh, Kathy, if you'd have known how proud your mother was that you were in law school. And you know, when you're an evening law student, and sometimes it gets really tough, I would think of those words that folks said about my mom, and that would kind of keep me moving. My dad was there with me the whole time through law school. Sadly, he passed away literally less than a year after I became a lawyer. So he never saw me become a legislator, and I think he would have thought I was crazy if he was living and I told him I was going to do this. I think he also would have been enormously proud. And I have 4 brothers, and at that time they were all kind of very encouraging too. So kind of all came together.
Oh,
yeah.
So you took the challenge. You decided you would become a legislator, go to Harrisburg. So you went out of a great law firm, Fox Rothschild, went to Harrisburg. How exciting was that? How scary was that? How did that work out?
It was exciting and scary. I did, once I landed at this big law firm and I was enjoying that, I kind of thought that was my destiny, that short-term next 5-year plan, if we want to call it that. But the interesting thing, of course, I was making a lot more money as a associate at a big law firm than the General Assembly was paying. And I just decided, I had taken some advice that my dad had given me early on, which was always live below your means. And I'd always done that. So I kind of had the ability, that gave me a little bit of hesitation. And then I thought, boy, you can make a difference here. And that's actually something I meant to bring out earlier. One of the other things that made me jump was not just the encouragement of folks like Dick Hayden and others, although that was very important. But when I was young, I had two visions of what it was my dad did. One was what I will refer to as my negative concerns. He was a big leader. He was in the newspaper all the time. You never knew if you were going to wake up in the morning and read something bad about your dad in the newspaper. And, through the eyes of any child, your parents are your heroes, right? So that was very hard. And on that front, Dick Hayden said to me, Kath, don't worry about it. Your dad was like a big fish in a little pond. He was a big leader. He had, a half a dozen local newspapers where he was the biggest story in town. He said, in Philadelphia, they don't even know who we are. We have one big newspaper, two big newspapers at the time. They write all about the mayor and city council. You have to fight to get your name in the newspaper. That's not going to be really an issue. You'll be able to define your personality to your constituents on your terms much more than what your dad was probably able to do. So that kind of allayed my concerns about the negative. But what really made me jump on the positive was, again, through a child's eyes, I couldn't go anywhere with my dad that people didn't stop us on the street to thank him for something that he did in their life. Thank him for helping them through some hardship. Thank him for helping their son when he needed something, or their father or mother when they needed something. And when I really thought of the opportunity that Dick and others were asking me to step up to the plate and try, I thought, where else? I mean, in the law, you make a difference in a client's life, hopefully, and in smaller ways. But as a policymaker, you make a difference in really big ways that can affect a lot of people. And you also end up with the power, and I say that in a altruistic way. I mean, clearly power can go to people's heads in a negative way. But a title of an elected official conferred on you opens doors to help people solve their problems in ways that sometimes as a citizen or even as an attorney, you can't get those doors open in the same way. And so I was excited and challenged about the ability to have that opportunity to do that.
And eventually you were able to serve on some important committees. You became chair of a committee or a subcommittee. What were some of those?
Yeah. I want to tell a story because sometimes this is another one of those, how do pathways come to you? And it affected my career after I left the General Assembly. I got to the legislature as a freshman, and there you say, here are my committee preferences, but really, they try to give you one that you like. And they did give me judiciary, which was one of my top choices, and on which I served all the years of my time in the General Assembly. But I ended up being assigned to what at the time was called the Public Health and Welfare Committee. And there was the Democratic chair at the time, a line of a man named Representative Dave Richardson from Philadelphia, represented part of North Philly, very impoverished area. And Dave really carried the mantle of his people. And not long after I got there, the welfare reform movements had started to change welfare as we know it, and Dave was really concerned, and I was really concerned about the impact that was going to have, particularly on people's health. So I had noticed in the first term that I was there that whenever it came to issues of poor people's rights or poor people's health or safety, Dave was like the only one that was championing or advocating or speaking on their behalf. So I went up to him and I said, Mr. Chairman, do you need some help with the debate on welfare reform? And he looked at me like, oh my gosh, somebody wants to help. And he said, absolutely. So, here this line of a senior person and me as the younger person really organized a lot of effort around amendments and things to soften the impact on people's health that these measures would have. And so I kind of developed a bit of an expertise from that, a reputation in my caucus of understanding these issues. And then sadly, Dave Richardson passed away. Oh. So I end up, everyone in my caucus kind of looks at me and says, okay, now you're our point person on public health and welfare issues. Right. Again, something I never really anticipated, but something I ended up being a champion of throughout my whole legislative career.
Okay. Are there any other legislative accomplishments that you are particularly proud of?
Well, I worked, as I mentioned, 18 years on judiciary, and there's two that I want to mention because they actually are, I'm very proud of them, and I also worked with the PBA on them.
Oh, great.
So, access to justice funding. Funding for public civil legal services was historically on the decline, both at the federal and the state level. The demand was growing, and legal services in Pennsylvania was really struggling. And so working on a PBA task force, we came up with an idea for a filing fee surcharge that would inure a couple of dollars of extra filing fee for dedicated to civil community services.
Nice.
And it took a lot of effort. It took a couple of attempts. It took some negotiation with the courts as well, because they viewed the filing fees originally as the avenue that they were getting money to modernize the court's computer system, which was also very important. So the first bill we got passed had a lion's share of the fee dollars going towards the computer modernization project, with a piece of it going for legal services. But over time, that paradigm shifted. As computerization happened, we were able to continue to increase the funding for civil legal services. So I'm really, really proud of that. Towards the end of my career, I served as subcommittee chair on the Judicial Committee for Family Law. And I had watched for those 18 years on that committee numerous attempts to get child custody laws reformed, modernized, for lack of a better word to say. And I thought, darn it. And Senator Stuart Greenleaf had a bill. He was always able to get it through the Senate, and it would get stuck in the House. So I went to Senator Greenleaf and I said, do you mind if I introduce a version of your bill in the House and try to shepherd it through the House Judiciary Committee, and we'll just see whichever one makes it through first, we'll see what passes. A lot of senators and representatives are very proprietary about their legislation. But Senator Greenleaf, to his credit, said, yes, let's do that. And we championed that through the House. It took a lot of education. It took a lot of public input hearings to get everyone comfortable with it. But in the end, by kind of working that very systematically, we were able to get the bill through the House, over to the Senate. Senator Greenleaf moved it through. And since I know you practice family law, you're very aware that happened. And I'm sure there are tweaks that have happened or may need to be happened, but I think most of the family law community on both sides were very happy that those reforms made it through. And there was a lot of effort from PBA family law committee to help make that happen.
Yeah, that is near and dear to my heart because I was on the PBA side making some of those phone calls and talking to your staff. It was a great experience and a good example of the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the legislators who listened to work together. And then in the meantime, there you were getting active in the PBA, having wonderful positions of responsibility, chair of the House of Delegates. So why PBA and how did you do that?
Yeah. So when I became a legislator, there was no prohibition against having other outside income, but I knew how I wanted to do it, and I wanted to be dedicated 100% of the time. So I made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to try to maintain practicing law or look for an of-counsel position, et cetera. But I wanted to stay connected to my profession and to my roots and to the legal community. Well, connecting dots way back, I mentioned a name when I first interviewed at Fox Rothschild, Peter Vira, former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District. He was now a partner at Fox Rothschild. He was one of the people that interviewed me. I run for office. His goddaughter is living in Philadelphia. He recommends to her that she volunteer on my campaign. We become very good friends. She's also a young lawyer. She's working at that time with another PBA and WIP active member, Bobby Liebenberg. And Bobby was helping to coordinate one of the first WIP retreats. And Brett was going to the WIP retreat. And she said to me, come to this WIP retreat with me. That was literally, other than being a PBA member, that was literally the first thing that I did after I left private practice to kind of plunge myself into the PBA pool. And anybody who has ever been to a WIP retreat knows that's all you need to do, and then you're hooked.
Yeah.
So I was hooked.
Oh, that's great. And I know we appreciated your leadership through the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and you continue to be an active face of the Pennsylvania Bar Institute, and we really appreciate your involvement. So you didn't stay in Harrisburg forever.
I didn't stay forever. I stayed for a long time.
Yeah.
18 years in the General Assembly. And, you know, when I first got there, you sit back, you observe the culture of the place, and there's all different kinds of legislators, just like there are in every profession. And there were certainly folks, lots of folks that had the fire in their belly, I would call it. And then there were folks that you could clearly tell the fire had left their belly, but they were still there. They were still there. And I said, I don't ever want to be that kind of person. And at about year 16, I was feeling the burnout. And I talked privately with just some of my closest colleagues and staff about maybe not running again. And of course they all, you can't not run again. And I was like, I'm not giving it my 100%. Well, your 80% is probably better than most people's 100%. I said, it doesn't matter. That's kind of how I feel. So I started making phone calls. And it's very, you know, when you're an elected official, you don't ever want word to get out that you're not going to run again until you're really not going to do it. So I made a list, thinking of what Dick Hayden had done with me, of women who lived in my district who I thought would be a good elected official. No idea whether they had any interest. And I started calling them and just gently planting a seed. You know, I'm not going to do this forever. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do it. Had you ever thought of it? And of the 5 or 6, 3 or 4 of them told me that I was crazy. No, they have no interest. But 2 were interested. One, not at the time because she had young children and was very involved in their sports and extracurricular activities and did not want to take away from that. And one who said, I've always wanted to do that. And I said to her, do you want to do it now? And she's like, well, I have, you know, business things. I really couldn't do it right now. So I ran one more time, and I kept kind of encouraging her to think about it. Come shadow me, see what it's like, come to a meeting, come to Harrisburg. And then a year later, I said, now are you ready? And she said, I think I have my affairs in order. And so that was when I announced my retirement.
Okay, all right. So I love the fact that you were mentoring your replacement, but then you were on your way out of Harrisburg. What was the next plan? I don't think you stayed in Harrisburg. Where did you go?
Yeah. Well, I didn't necessarily have a next plan.
Oh, okay.
Except there were a couple things going through my mind. First of all, unlike many other positions, when you're running for office, you have to decide more than a year in advance that you're going to give it up if you're going to follow the normal cycles, because the nominating petition process starts a year before the actual election. So I knew I would have, I knew I was feeling burnt out. I knew that being a public servant and elected official was the kind of position that you really had to, if you were going to do it right, you had to be giving it your all. And I was in my early 50s, and I kept thinking, you know, now's a good time for a transition, and you're still young enough that someone's going to want you. I didn't know who would want me or exactly what I wanted to do. So I put the announcement out there that I wasn't going to run again. I didn't publicly endorse the woman candidate that I had been mentoring until after the process was all over, because I didn't want to close anybody else out from running if they wanted to. But then I started to kind of explore options. Mm-hmm. And I, at the beginning, only knew a couple of things. I didn't want to lobby. I didn't want to run for anything else. And I wanted to take the experience I had gained in the legislature and find a new path for it. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up right in my own backyard working for a human service provider agency where they hired me to be their senior vice president. And Intercommunity Action provided health and housing services to seniors, to people with intellectual disabilities, to people who had mental health needs, et cetera. All things that I had advocated in the legislature for, and became their advocate on many of these issues, because that first experience I had my first year that I talked about with Representative Dave Richardson, kind of taking me under his fold and saying, yay, somebody else wants to help me with these issues. So I had 18 years of kind of building a knowledge base around that. But from my perspective, I always, I was very interested in my next step being in actual management, in running an organization, helping to run an organization. And so this position kind of brought a knowledge base I had developed in the legislature and gave me the opportunity to hone and further develop my people management and organizational management skills and budgeting skills and all that kind of thing.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, so time marches on and Tom Wolf becomes governor. Were you knocking on his door? Because, well, I kind of think you went back to Harrisburg.
I did end up back in Harrisburg. Another moment of bravery. I had been at the nonprofit for about 3 years, and I was getting a little itchy about what other opportunities were out there. And a coalition of public education advocates had just gotten funding from the Pew Charitable Trust to start up a statewide initiative to get a fair public education funding formula in Pennsylvania, and they were looking for somebody to manage the process. And they reached out to me and asked me to consider it. And that was a kind of a big step, because I was leaving an organization that was a big organization. I was going to be kind of a solo manager of all of these executives in their own right, trying to get everybody on the same page. It was just a 2-year initiative, which was both less scary than more. I think that was very appealing, because it was like, okay, I could do this for 2 years, and then it might be a good transition to either another nonprofit or who knows what else. It ended up that I didn't last there 2 years because 5-6 months into it, Governor Wolf got elected, And I got a call from his transition team that a couple of people had recommended me for a couple of different ideas for cabinet posts, and would I come in and interview. And I was a little bit, I was very excited about that, but I always had this high sense of obligation. I think women in particular carry that a lot. So I was talking with a few people at the campaign for fair education funding in confidence, because of course, and they were like, we knew when we hired you for this that there was that chance that you might be going there, which I hadn't even really thought about, but they had already thought about it, and they thought you absolutely should interview with the governor's transition team. And I was very thrilled when, I think very highly of Governor Wolf, and I was very thrilled when they offered me the position to be Secretary of Labor and Industry.
So labor and industry, and I've loved getting to know you, but labor and industry, did that make sense? Was that a new challenge? Surely another big ladder.
Yeah. In some ways, no, and in some ways, yes. I mentioned my earliest career before I became a lawyer. I spent almost 10 years in the field of employment and training and labor management relations with two nonprofits in Philly. One still exists, the Philadelphia Area Labor Management Committee. So I kind of knew my way around organized labor and their issues. I knew my way around employment and training issues in general. But I had never, the Department of Labor and Industry has a $750 million plus budget, over 5,000 employees, operates the biggest workers' insurance fund in the state with over $1.5 billion in reserves. That was very intimidating.
Wow.
That was very intimidating. But the governor's team said, we'll work with you. We'll help you build a competent team of deputies, which we did. And I think it worked really well because it ended up helping me kind of develop this notion of shared ownership on problem solving, the ability to trust in the expertise of the people who work work for me and not be threatened by it, but kind of help them. What sometimes happens in any organization, but bureaucracies in particular, sometimes people can get paralyzed because of the politics that surround an issue of making a decision. And so I was able to kind of work with them, and we really together learned how kind of shared ownership of decisions helped us move forward and really conquer and accomplish a lot instead of being paralyzed into inaction by not being able to do things.
I think that's such an important lesson of leadership that it sounds to me like you were the big boss, but you needed their expertise.
Absolutely.
They were the individual experts, but they needed your courage and bravery to get things done. And I really think that's a wonderful model that all leaders, not just women, but women included, should kind of incorporate in their careers and their progress. Well, that's wonderful. So you did that stint, and now you're with the Gaming Control Board. What was the transition there? I know when you're in Harrisburg and there's always...
Yeah, so when you're in any kind of public elected or appointed position, I want to phrase this because I think it's different than how we normally think. For example, when I was an elected official, I used to say, I'm my own boss and I have 60,000 bosses at the same time. Because you don't get your process, well, you get your job kind of through an interview process, but that interview process is called a campaign and a ballot box, right? So you serve at the pleasure of your constituents.
Right.
And you serve in an appointed position at the pleasure of your appointing authority. So I was honored to have been asked to be Secretary of Labor. When the governor asked me to consider going over on the Gaming Control Board, you don't say no to somebody who's been so good to you. And I knew there would be things about L&I that I would miss, and I do. But I had seen the legislative branch of government. I had seen the administrative branch of government. And now here was an opportunity to see what the regulatory side of a public service was all about. And so, now I'm serving in a role as a regulator of this growing industry in Pennsylvania, and it is both fun and an awesome responsibility.
Right, right. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion in the women in the profession and among a lot of us about work-life balance. Women seem to be affected by the pull of others. They want to give you advice on your career. Should you have a family? Why don't you have children? Your personal life. So how has that influenced you, affected you? I'm pretty sure you heard those comments.
Yeah, sure you do. I think it's very normal, for us to both seek advice and be encouraged, or even, I don't know if proud is the word, but when somebody says to you, I think you'd be good at this, especially if it's something that is beyond what you imagined reaching for, it kind of pumps you up, and it can be both a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what's the right thing for you. And what I mean by that, I can look back now on my career and even on my time in my education and back to high school, where folks kind of had to push me to step out of my comfort zone. And I talked about that in the very beginning, those moments of bravery. I was never someone who was the aggressive one going after it. Oftentimes it took someone saying, I see this in you, for me to think about it and say, oh, I think I could see that in me too, and step out of my comfort zone to that moment of bravery. But sometimes people will encourage you to do something, and that's just not the right thing for you.
Right.
And I think it's the hardest thing to kind of figure out. When I was leaving the General Assembly, a lot of people were encouraging me to run for higher office. Oh, you're a lawyer, you're going to run for judge, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I actually, the judicial thing kind of intrigued me. I had not been in a courtroom at all. I thought I'm not qualified from my point of view to be a trial judge. I certainly had been in state government for an awful long time. I thought about Commonwealth Court. I went so far as to talk to friends of mine who served on Commonwealth Court, both about what it meant and about what it entailed. I thought it was something that I could do well, but in the end, I thought, yeah, you wear a black robe and people call you your honor. Isn't that nice? But on a day-to-day basis, is that really what I want to do every day? And it just didn't seem like a good fit for me. And that was how I ended up out in the nonprofit world. But I want to turn back to what I call these moments of bravery. I often get asked to talk to groups of young people about career development or past or leadership development. And over the time I've kind of developed, this took 35, 40 years of wisdom. It didn't just pop in my head. But I realized when I now frame it to people in, I talk about what I call my 3 Ps. Preparation, perseverance, and positioning. And I'll mention them briefly because positioning is really that bravery thing. But preparation is, you gotta know your stuff. You gotta be prepared. You gotta do your due diligence for whatever it is you want. You can't just skate on in life on your good looks. Some people do, but it eventually catches up with them, right? The problem, especially with a lot of women and younger women, I'm thinking this is changing, but of my generation, is we thought preparation was all it took. And someone was going to notice us and say, oh, aren't you fabulous? Let me plunk you here. Sometimes that happens, but it doesn't happen without positioning. Positioning is what I'll call that taking advantage of those opportunities, stepping out of your comfort zone, being brave when you really want to be a wallflower, right? if you don't step out and get noticed for your competence, if you don't do something that puts you out there so that people recognize that confidence as well as that competence, you're likely not going to get that next opportunity. A lot of people will say, oh, I was just lucky. And I've said that over my years. I was just lucky. All these opportunities came to me because I was lucky. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky or blessed. But I also realize in hindsight, I was positioning. Mm-hmm. I was taking that next opportunity. When I left the comfort zone of intercommunity action after the legislature to take this 2-year stint on the campaign for fair education funding, I knew 2 things. I knew I was passionate about the issue and we'd been trying to solve this forever. And if we can make a dent in it, I wanted to be a part of it. I also knew I kind of missed, even though I didn't want to be an elected official anymore, I kind of missed the public policy scene.
Right.
And this would give me an opportunity to get back on that scene. I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, and then someone's going to recognize me, and then someone's going to recommend me to the governor, and then I'm going to end up a cabinet secretary. That isn't exactly what I was thinking. Right. But I was thinking I was putting myself in a position to be back on a wider stage. Right. And that was really important. Yeah. The last lesson that I think is so critical to leadership development is perseverance. Mm-hmm. You're going to fail. Sometimes you're going to fail twice before you pass that New Jersey bar exam the 3rd time. You're going to fail. That's not a bad thing. Right. Failing meant you tried. Not failing sometimes means you succeeded. More often, it means you didn't even try. Mm. So when I said in the very beginning, the thing that made me run for public office, one of the things was I didn't want to look back 20 or 30 years later and say, I once had this opportunity and I didn't try. Mm-hmm. That's a sense of perseverance. Whenever I put my jeans and sweatshirt on instead of my suit and went and took the New Jersey bar exam that 3rd time instead of going into the office, that was perseverance. That was pulling something out from underneath you that said, I am good enough. I can do this. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to keep trying until I get there. And I think all 3 of those go together. You have to be prepared. You have to know your stuff. There's no substitute for being a good technician, to be really good at your craft. Mm-hmm. But you have to put yourself out there so that people know you're good at your craft. Right. You have to find ways to let that competency shine. And you can't let defeat get you down. You have to keep persevering. And I think I learned all of those lessons along the way. I didn't know them when I was 22 years old, right? But I know them now, and it makes me less scared and more, less needing to kind of find those moments of bravery that I talked about in the beginning, and more able to kind of just work through that next ladder or work down that next chute. Mm-hmm. So Mary, I have no idea what my next ladder or my next chute is, but I'm ready for it. I'm happy where I am, and I'm ready for a next opportunity, you know?
Well, I really appreciate your sharing your story. And as I said, when I started looking at your resume, I didn't know how many ladders there were. I love the image that sometimes you're going down the chute because you blew it, but sometimes you're going down the chute because you can't wait until the next ladder. And I can't wait to see what next ladder presents itself to you, Kathy. This has been a privilege, and we will be sharing this with our women in the profession, so hopefully they too can be inspired.
Excellent. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
You're welcome.